Before we get serious and heavy about Easter, I want to prepare for next week, for the blessing of the pet. A guy spots a sign outside of a house that reads, "Talking dog for sale." Intrigued, he walks in. "So what have you done with your life?" he asks the dog. "I've led a very full life," the dog says. "I lived in the Alps, rescuing avalanche victims. Then I served my country in Iraq. And now I spend my days reading to the residents of a retirement home." The guy's flabbergasted. He asks the dog's owner, "Why on earth would you want to get rid of an incredible dog like that?" The owner says, "Because he's a liar. He never did any of that." What I want to share with us today is that the Easter story is not just something that's in the Bible. The Easter story is something that's happening to us right now. The Easter story is something that happened to us yesterday. And the Easter story is something that will happen to us tomorrow. This is a metaphor of daily experience of life. It's not a disembodied, distant, happening to someone else event. So let's take a look at this. See if that resonates for us. Because of all the stories in the Christian scripture, is there any one that's more glorious, more hopeful, more stirring than that of the disciples and Mary and the others who went to the tomb and found that it was empty? And that something miraculous had changed? Because remember, for all of these folks, the followers of Jesus, the hours after his death on that cross up there on Calvary must have been the darkest of their lives. After living and traveling with him day and night for 3 years, learning from him, enjoying his company, letting him transform their lives completely and thoroughly, they witnessed him being brought down by his enemies. At the end of a night and day filled with the kind of terror and violence they'd never before experienced, their teacher, their way-shower, their friend, abruptly disappeared. I mentioned their experience, their human experience, as I did last week on Palm Sunday, because, as I said, the story of the death and resurrection of Jesus in the Christian scriptures is not merely the chronicle of something that happened several thousand years ago, or if you don't believe it happened at all, it's not the story of a great and powerful myth. It is nothing less than our story. It is an accurate account of what we are undergoing in our lives, both as individuals and as members of this incredible human species. So this means whatever we are experiencing every moment of our lives, whatever we are feeling, thinking, imagining in this room right now, what are you feeling? What are you thinking? Is God the good omnipotent that we affirmed at the beginning of the service. What I am feeling right now is God's feeling, active in my life in this moment. Charles Fillmore, who is the co-founder of the Unity Movement along with his wife Myrtle, famously said that the Bible is the metaphysical account, that is the account beyond just the physical appearance, of the unfolding of consciousness in and through us. The Bible faithfully reminds us of how consciousness is evolving in our own lives from moment to moment. The parables and the other teachings of Jesus in the Scriptures are explicit instructions about how we shift from our finite human scope of awareness, as Suzanne shared in the meditation, into the boundless, infinite, divine mind, what Jesus calls the kingdom of heaven. So it's the story of the shift from belief in lack and limitation into the experience of boundless possibility. The words and instructions that Jesus shares in the Scripture, as I said last week, are the talk, and his death and resurrection are the walk. Now, to fully appreciate this, as true students, I want to turn to the final chapter of Lessons in Truth by Dr. Emily Cady. Now, we've been studying what she has to teach us in Lessons in Truth for the last couple of months, so we're going to bring it all together. Dr. Cady, Lessons in Truth, and Easter, all in one. Because what she is teaching us in Lessons in Truth is her version of what Jesus is teaching us through his words and his actions. So it is fitting that we complete our study of Lessons in Truth today, because it's the day that we celebrate Jesus' demonstration of truth, or what Dr. Cady calls realization of spirit, that is, making spirit real in this moment. So the last chapter of the book is called Unity of the Spirit. A manifestation of this unity of spirit is what we're celebrating today. We celebrate this because, as we will see, when Jesus rose from the dead into eternal and permanent divine consciousness, he forged body, mind, and spirit into a single vessel of spirit. All the fear and resistance that he experienced in his humanness as he faced death were now absorbed into the single divine experience that is, in fact, always the only thing going on. When, with the help of the Father, he conquered death, he realized, that is, he made real and concrete spirit within. He demonstrated the triumph of divine mind over the limited belief in the things of the flesh that characterizes our human development. He made what appears to us to be two things, the human and the divine, one. Not one thought or belief, for those are products of the intellect, but one experience, one awareness, one realization. Throughout Lessons in Truth, Dr. Cady has been urging us to cease the quest for intellectual understanding of this and to stop by conscious intention, stop our exertions to find the light, and instead simply let God dawn inside. Look within, she tells us, and meekly ask Spirit to reveal itself. Don't be deflected by trifles and non-essentials. Just keep our eyes on the prize. So it will come as no surprise that in the last chapter of the book, she is again saying this: I want to stimulate you to lose sight of all differences, all side issues and lesser things, and seek but one thing. That is the consciousness of the presence of an indwelling God in you and in your life. I want, if possible, to help break down the seeming middle wall of partition, quoting Ephesians, even as Christ, the living Christ, does in reality break down or destroy all misunderstanding. On this Easter Sunday, we celebrate the resurrection of Jesus, now the Christ, but resurrection into what? We can say, metaphysically, resurrection out of the dead-end, limited human awareness into the never-ending, unbounded consciousness of spirit, of divine mind. We can hear what Charles Fillmore has to say about this in his atom-smashing power of mind. He says this: we must rise to the conscious realization, again, there's that word, realization, making real, that every thought of mind, every atom of body, every molecule of being, every function of nature, and every force is divine. And that all of these do and shall vibrate to the harmonies of spirit. This is the resurrection of man. There is no other. This is what Dr. Cady says about the moment when the stone is rolled away, the tomb is unsealed, and the new consciousness arises and walks the earth. She says, It represents the moment that any man really comes to recognize that which is absolute truth, namely that one Spirit, even the Father, being made manifest in the Son, ever lives at the center of all human beings. When the Christ consciousness resurrects into our lives, when we finally realize, and this is my term, when I realize, what does that mean? I stop fighting the reality that Spirit is always living within us. The tensions and trials of our human experience lose their power. Where before we saw troubles, limits, doubts, fears, now we see God. We see and experience the singular activity that has always been the only thing happening. Now all the agony and drama that Jesus, and in our own life's trials we, endured on the walk to the cross, are transformed. We are now resurrected into the peace that surpasses intellectual understanding. We abide now in sufficiency, serenity, and joy. We accept the turbulences and trials of life with equanimity, for they are equally manifestations of Spirit, as are the easy moments, the happy moments. We see in everything only God. Regardless of the evidence of our bodies and minds, here's the challenge: if oneness and not separation is our actual reality, then we must be seeing God everywhere. So the resurrection that we celebrate today is not a unique, one-time, exclusive to Jesus experience. No, indeed, it is something that is continuously occurring so that all humans may come to the fullness of our divine potential. And that includes us in this room. So from this, I conclude it's not necessarily big dramatic things like the scriptural story of the death and resurrection of Jesus. That's pretty dramatic. I mean, we have those kinds of times in our lives, right? Weddings, births of children and grandchildren, landing the job we've been wanting, visiting other countries or going on a cruise, dealing with sickness and death. These are all big things. But mostly our lives are filled with mundane and repetitive daily activities. Getting up, getting dressed, having a meal, doing the shopping, taking care of the house, dealing with friends and relatives, watching the news, full of daily repetitive things. But the Easter story reminds us that we are rescued from the grave any time we remember to let go and let God, regardless of the circumstances. Why, it could be something as routine as driving on the freeway. Someone cuts us off. Traffic slows annoyingly. Or maybe we get a flat tire and have to pull over and get it fixed. Ugh. Several months ago, I consciously set an intention to turn every driving annoyance over to God. I mean, intellectually, I understood I had no control over other drivers. I had no control over the volume of traffic on the road. I had no control of accidents that maybe occurred. And for a long time in my life, since I got my driver's license at age 16, knowing that didn't make any difference. I still got upset every time something irritating happened while I was driving. But I want to share something. Ever since I set that intention to turn driving annoyance over to God, whenever I encounter something on the road that alters my rhythm or my expectation of arriving on time, I get to practice letting go. And you know what? The truth is, traffic inconveniences rarely annoy me anymore. I might get a little of irritation, but that passes quickly. Instead, I remember to reset my focus and my relationship with God, and I feel taken care of and loved in my car. I drive my car, and God handles the traffic. Those of us who were here a couple of weeks ago got to hear from Esther, Layla, and Jackie as they shared with us an experience of healing from physical challenges that each of them was experiencing in their lives. They too let go and trusted God. You remember, each one of them reported what seemed like a life-threatening challenge. They had tried all of the medical remedies, the doctors, and the regular therapies that hospitals have to offer. And so they turned to something else. They were led to something else. They let go of the old trying to do things according to practice, regular Western practice, and they just tried something different. But they put their faith in it. They put God into their healing. And I would suggest that that was an Easter experience for each of those women. That in their willingness to let go and let God, their restored health became the rising from difficulties into peace and triumph. Now, each of us has a story of overcoming, of letting go, of experiences of grace and serendipity. And these are the many Easters of our lives. And there are always more to come. These events may not be written up in the Bible, they may not be important enough to be biblical stories, but they are the kind of resurrection experiences that any of us has whenever we choose God's will over our own. They may or may not be dramatic, but they bring a feeling of peace and relief, and just that is our experience of God. Just that. Direct, immediate, and wonderful. So Dr. Katie is referring to this when she says, there's no reason why we, having come to recognize God as infinite substance, should by this recognition be deprived of the familiar fatherly companionship that in all ages has been so dear to the human heart. There is no necessity for us to separate God as substance and God as tender father. No reason why we should not, and every reason why we should, have both in one. They are one. God principle outside us as unchangeable law, God within us as tender, loving father-mother who has compassion for our every sorrow. So God may be, she's suggesting, divine law or principle, but God is also at one and the same time infinite love. Here's how she says it. God is principle, but God is individual also. Principle becomes individualized the moment it comes to dwell in external manifestations in a human body. Individualized here means in each of our day-to-day, regular old lives. Individualized in each of us. Whatever is happening is a potential Easter experience. In rising from death, Jesus achieves the spiritual realization that Dr. Katie describes. But it's not that Jesus, the man, turns into disembodied Christ consciousness. Jesus doesn't disappear. When he steps from the tomb, he is still fully Jesus, the human being. So what's different? This is what Dr. Katie says. It is as though infinite wisdom and power, which outside our Creator, upholder, and principle, become transformed into infinite love, which is Father-Mother, with all the warmth and tender helpfulness that this world implies, and they become focalized, so to speak, within a human body. In some way, the intellectual mind does not know, in some way this indwelling one does move to lift the consciousness of his children up and to place it parallel with God, principle, law, so that no longer the two are crossed, but the two are made one. Let's not be distracted by her language. She's speaking somewhat abstractly here, but she wants us to understand that she is talking about our daily lives. But whatever we are experiencing, she's talking about what happened when we woke up this morning. She's talking about what happened as we prepared to come here. She's talking about what we're experiencing right now, sitting here or listening. We saw last week on Palm Sunday that when Jesus endured understandable mental and physical anguish as he walked toward his destiny, He was experiencing the same torment that we do when we encounter difficulties and trials. The point of her lesson is that for Jesus then, as for us here now, this is what she says, the whole business of your Lord, the Father in you, is to care for you, to love you with an everlasting love, to note your slightest cry and to rescue you. You might rightly ask, did the Father rescue Jesus, as Jesus was asking in the garden? Remember what Jesus said? Father, if thou be willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but thy will be done. So in the very last sentence of Lessons in Truth, in the very last sentence, Dr. Katie reveals what really happened when Jesus made that statement in the garden, and what happens for us as well when we speak equally. This is what she says. God, Father, Mother, is a present help in time of need, but there must be a recognition of his presence, a turning away from human efforts and an acknowledgement of God only, a single eye, before he becomes manifest. So when Jesus said in the garden, not my will be done but thine, he was doing what Dr. Katie says is necessary for the Christ consciousness to arise. He turned away from human efforts, in this case his own, and acknowledged God only. And his reward was transformation into the Christ. So let's be clear. We ourselves access Christ within every time we let go and let God. The entire story of the trial, death, and resurrection is our story. Every day we experience difficulties. That's the way of the world. But our difficulties are not who we are. We are spirit, having these amazing and often mysterious human experiences. So let's take a moment now and check within ourselves. Let's put our hands over our hearts. Feel the pulse. Notice what we might be thinking about what we're feeling. Hear the room. And in this moment, affirm silently, this is God in me. What I am experiencing is God in me. This is God in me. What I'm experiencing is God in me. So let's conclude by letting Charles Fillmore explain from his book, Keep a True Lent, this special significance of Easter for each of us. Suzanne shared some of this at the opening, and it's worth going over it again. This is what Charles Fillmore says. Every time we rise to the realization of eternal indwelling Christ, making union with Father Mind, the resurrection of Jesus takes place within us. All thoughts of limitation and inevitable obedience to material law are left in the tomb of materiality. Jesus was born into the race thought so that he might construct it in conformity with the divine law, and thus he became our way shower, our Savior, our helper. So today the light of truth is illumining my mind, and I rise up in the majesty of my divine sonship or daughtership and proclaim myself to be the child of the Most High, free from all belief in sin, sickness, and death. I affirm in unity with Christ, I realize that I am resurrected into the life, light, and power of God right here, right now. And we said that at the opening of the service. So my friends, each of us often feels as if we are walking through the valley of the shadow of death. But when we do like Jesus did, when we keep our focus on God, when we remember to deny the thoughts that do not serve and affirm only those which bring us closer to realizing Spirit, then surely goodness and mercy shall follow us every day, and we shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And in our hearts we will hear the vaults of heaven resound with joy that we have come home again to the kingdom within.